All right, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. It's 1 o'clock Mountain Time. You will be watching the technical session, HazMat Transportation, an important, often overlooked branch of EHS education, by Wendy Buckley, President and CEO of STARS HazMat Consulting. Rescheduled from last week because our virtual platform had an issue. So Wendy is a longtime firefighter and HazMat responder, a recovering federal regulator, and the former manager of regulatory affairs for a global laboratory supply company. Wendy now owns a hazardous materials consulting firm known as STARS. She is also an associate professor of HazMat Transportation for grads and undergrads. Wendy is a proud mom of 4 children aged 4 and under and resides in sunny Florida. So Wendy, I will let you take it away now. Oh, I think you're muted.
I would like to unmute, yes.
There we go.
Okay, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, looks great.
Great, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you guys so much for having me and for taking time out of your day to attend this session. This is a subject I feel very strongly about, and I look forward to bringing my thoughts to you on this. So just to give you a little bit of background about me, as Brett mentioned, I am the president of STARS Consulting, which is a HazMat consulting firm. We're a B2B company, obviously. We help companies that transport hazardous materials do so better, more safely, and less expensively. And our clients are primarily the shippers that are offering those materials into transportation, although we do work with some carriers. Mostly we're dealing with manufacturers, distributors, people that add value to those products and sell them. Some of the things that I've done throughout my career, Brett mentioned my job history, but there's a little more to it than that. I was recently quoted in the New York Times on some technical aspects of an accident that had happened. I used to have a regular guest spot on Sirius XM radio, and I've also recently written a textbook directed both at students and professionals in the industry, which you see on the bottom there. So I've been around this industry a long time, and my purview comes from within academia and from without. So that's where I'm coming from when I speak to you today. The most important thing is that safety is not all about writing reports. I was actually teaching a class for the first half of the day today, and that was one of the very specific questions that some of the students in the class asked me when we were talking about this transportation class. They wrote, well, what kind of reports do I have to submit? Well, there's not really reports for transportation like there is with a lot of the EPA and the OSHA stuff. It's not a desk job. This really is the kind of thing that you need to get out in the field, and most importantly, be proactive, prevent illnesses and injuries to coworkers, to yourselves, to the public. So this is a much more hands-on job than a lot of people realize right away. So get out in the field. As EHS professionals, what we do saves lives. And for anyone that might not know, there's so many different acronyms, but EHS basically stands for Environmental Health and Safety. There's different versions of this. There's SHEES, there's EHHS, there's all kinds of things. Anyway, the point is, what we're talking about is environmental health and safety. We must always be looking for opportunities for improvement and taking a holistic view of the company. I'm going to say this again in a little while, but our job as EHS professionals does not stop once we leave our fence line. We still have to include in our assessments the origin to destination. If we make all kinds of great stuff, it doesn't do us any good if we can't sell it, if we can't move it to our suppliers or to our customers or people that can use our end product. So transportation is a very key aspect of any EHS career. And the point of view that we are going to take in this session here is that it needs to be a practical approach. Yes, we need to know the regulations. We need to know the stuff that's in the book and what we have to do. But more importantly, we need to know how to apply it in the real world. And unfortunately, in my experience, an environmental health and safety curriculum does not often include a lot of information on transportation. So I pulled this list together of a bunch of different universities, and to is a judgment on no one at all. This is my perspective as a former DOT inspector, as someone who's been in the field a long time, and who also teaches this stuff in an academic environment. If your experience is different, that's wonderful. But this is my experience. And when I was doing research for this presentation, I went to several different university websites to kind of pull together what the commonalities were between them. And so the topics that I have up here, yours certainly may include other ones, and that's okay. But this is generally what they tend to include. Things like OSHA regulations, environmental regulations, some math, science, and you know, chemistry, physics, biology, that sort of thing. Emergency management, a lot of times, certain research methods like sampling, things like that. Those are the standards, and those are all really, really important. I take nothing away from those. But, oh, by the way, they also include maybe 1.5 to 3 hours of transportation. And these couple of paragraphs here I took from 2 or 3 different university programs from their catalogs. And basically what this is saying is they're teaching them how to read the book. And that's great. But when you're out and these students graduate from the environmental health and safety program, they need to know more than just how to read the book. They need to know how to apply this in their real jobs. When you're out in the EHS career, it incorporates so many things. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But transportation is a key part of that, and it's often not appreciated. The students get out into their careers, and they don't realize how much of their job is really dependent upon transportation. And that's a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity for regulatory compliance, for safety measures, for cost savings. There's so many things that go into this, and we're going to talk about that today. So this here says, the last line, emphasis placed on identifying, interpreting, and applying sections from the Code of Federal Regulations. Again, that's important, but it's not going to get them too far in their career. This job, environmental health and safety, is not just about the rules. It's about how to do things better, faster, cheaper, and safer. We got to stay in compliance, be efficient, and most importantly for our employers, we want to keep that competitive advantage. If they're following all the rules, but they're spending so much more money to do it than any of their competitors, they're not going to stay in business very long. So yes, safety and money are sometimes at odds with each other, but they don't have to be. That's the great thing about our American regulations, is they don't tell us exactly how we have to do something. They tell us what we have to accomplish. And then there's a whole myriad of ways that we can do that in a way that best utilizes their existing operation, their existing culture, and all of the things that are in their reality to make it as safe as possible within the regulations. There's options, is what I'm saying. However, if we don't educate our students on proper HazMat transportation, there's consequences, real, true life consequences to that. So for example, in 2017, PHMSA reported a total of about 3,400 in transportation. That sounds like a lot, but let's just stop for a second and put that into perspective, because there's about 800,000 shipments a day in the United States of hazardous materials. In 2017, these 3,400 incidents, while being a very small portion of the hazmat transportation that actually took place, had some real serious consequences. 2 people were hospitalized, 6 people died, and there was over $32 million in damages from hazardous materials. And spills are much more likely during the transportation, the actual live transportation, and during the unloading phases. And we'll talk about that here in just a second as well. So here's some images that I collected from the consequences of when things go wrong in transportation. If we don't handle the hazmat properly, if we don't package it properly, if we don't put it in the proper containers and close them the way we're supposed to, if we don't block and brace them and secure them inside for small packages, these consequences can be pretty severe. So as you can see from some of these pictures, there's interruption to our transportation system. The highways are shut down. There's waterway damage down in the lower left-hand corner. There's an oil spill, as a matter of fact. There's people who've been exposed in most all of these pictures. There's a pretty significant fire on both the right top and bottom. So consequences, if we don't do this stuff, if we don't appreciate the necessity and the importance and the vulnerability of it, can be quite steep. Just a couple more statistics for you, and then we'll get into the meat of the issue. Again, I mentioned there's 800,000 hazmat shipments every single day in the United States, and that's just the US. That doesn't include Canada, Mexico, or any other country, especially Europe, where there's a lot of hazardous materials shipped, okay? That's just here. And that means about 3.1 billion tons of materials shipped every year. As you can see from this graph, what this is showing you is that just for this year, 2021, there have been a significant amount, let's see, 23,000 in damages just from spills. Over here is another almost $15,000 from fires. So there's a lot of other causes too. There's environmental damage, waterway, and vapor gas dispersion. So as you can see, we're talking about real things here. And this is 2021. This is the time that we're currently in. I pulled these numbers on August 9th, so we're talking a week ago. Also, as of August 9th, the same day, 3,800 hazmat incidents and $36 million in damages so far this year. And we have 4 months left to go. Now, these all sound like really, really scary numbers, but again, let's put it in perspective. We're talking almost 1 million shipments every single day and only 3,800 incidents in over 8 months. It sounds like a lot, but when you put it in those numbers, we're talking about very, very small quantities. The problem is these are low frequency events, but very, very high consequence events. And that's why they're so important, because when something does go wrong with this stuff, it goes horribly wrong. So that's why transportation is so important. As educators in a university setting, our most important job as educators of higher learning is to set our students up for success. And according to Forbes, success is defined as things like feeling fulfilled in one's job, doing work we enjoy, financial stability, feeling suitably challenged, and feeling well prepared for the job ahead. And we think about what it would feel like to spend, what is an education now, 30, 50,000 more. And that could be potentially a year, depending on what school you're going to. And so if you spend all that money on an education, choosing your career path and environmental health and safety, and you get to your job and you feel completely unprepared for the job ahead, that would definitely not be success. So as educators, it's important that we help our students understand what their jobs are going to look like when they get to the real careers, and help them feel prepared to take that on. Transportation is a key component of moving every product, ingredient, and material we produce. If our customers and suppliers and vendors can't get the stuff that we're making, there's no commerce, there's no sale, and then there's no business. So this is an extremely important part of the manufacturing process, of the supply chain, of environmental health and safety. This is an absolute key. If the stuff can't get there safely, or if it's costing you so much in damages because we're losing so much product or cleaning up messes, we're not going to be able to stay in business very long. Okay, so now that we know what the issue is, what can we do? Well, first of all, we need to help EHS students better understand their universe. One of my jobs, again, as I mentioned, was as a DOT inspector, and now, of course, I'm a consultant. So one of my primary roles is to go into companies and help them identify where they can improve their operation, whether it be for safety or for financial reasons, for regulatory compliance. There are a whole myriad of reasons that people might want a service like this. And I go in and I help them identify these opportunities for improvement and help them identify ways that they can reduce costs, improve safety, and increase compliance. And because I get to do this so often, I'm meeting with companies in every walk of life in hazmat, whether it's paints and coatings, papers and pulp, specialty chemicals, ammonia and chlorine and other inhalation hazards. It's a huge range of products. So what that means is I get to see all the things that people do really, really well, and I get to see where some of the common weaknesses are. And one of the common weaknesses are that when people in the environmental health and safety, they understand workplace safety really, really well. They understand environmental safety and environmental regulations really, really well. Air permitting, water permitting, oftentimes even hazardous waste. But what they often are missing over and over and over again is this transportation piece. They don't understand how transportation works. They don't understand how the vehicles work, how the how packaging works. And there's a lot of missed opportunities here. They often tell me, quote at the bottom here, I don't know what I don't know. And the reason I have a job in this field is to help them understand what it is they don't know and help them close those gaps. So to start with, in the education field, we must stress the importance of safe hazmat transportation in EHS education. I mentioned this once already, I'm going to say it a couple more times. EHS is not just a fixed facility. It doesn't exist just within the fence lines of the company that you're working at or that you're dealing with. It must include origin to destination. Transportation has a high degree of vulnerability. If you think about it, once that material leaves the inside of your fence and gets into the hands of the carrier, there's somewhat of a loss of control for the shipper. But when, again, it's a high consequence event. So if things do go wrong, which doesn't happen often, thankfully, they can go very wrong. So what should I do about this? Obviously, the first and most important thing is we need to increase the amount and quality of EHS education devoted to transportation, especially when it comes to hazardous materials. We need to go beyond the regulations. We need to teach our students the practical application of these rules and relief. Minimum federal standards is the bare minimum. That's not where you want to be. So for example, there's standards in the regulations that say, you have to have training every 3 years. Does that mean you should only train every 3 years? Maybe not. Maybe it means you do what a lot of my clients do and have weekly or monthly or quarterly safety meetings where they can go over any sort of issues that they've had and say, hey, we've had this situation where we're having all these loose closures on our rail cars. Here's what's going on. Here's the violations we've gotten. Here's why we think they're happening. And then ask the employees, what do you think? Say, why do you think we're having such a hard time getting these rail cars properly closed? Do you have the proper equipment? Do you have the proper training? Are you being allowed the correct amount of time to conduct this? Are you even being told that this is something that's really important? Because a lot of times we find that the employees didn't even know that that was a priority, whatever it happens to be. So just because the regulations say you need training every 3 years, that doesn't mean necessarily that's the right solution for your company. So you need to kind of think outside that box a little bit and say, we need to go beyond those regulations. We need to figure out what makes sense for the situation that we're currently faced with and teach them how the transportation system works. Whether we're talking about boxes and bottles and drums and jerry cans on a truck, or we're talking about large bulk quantities on a rail car, or little teeny tiny specialized amounts going on an airplane. They need to understand how the packaging works and what logistics looks like. And I did see a few of the universities are teaching logistics, and that's great. We just need a little bit more of that universally. Teaching not only the regulations, but also some of the common and less common ways to use the regulations to their advantage. It amazes me oftentimes how many people in an EHS role don't know how to take advantage of some of the relief that's offered in the regulations that could save their companies a lot of money. So for example, one of my clients tried to make everything as simple as possible, but in doing so, they decided to ship every package that they had, regardless of what it was, as a fully regulated package. Which, okay, I get that. It makes it simple, but it also costs them an awful lot of money. So they were having problems with profitability. So one of the very first things that we did was we went in there and we helped them understand where they could take advantage of some of the built-in relief in the regulations. So one example of this is limited quantities. So we were able to help them figure out how to safely ship limited quantities in a way that benefits their company and helps them get to where they need to be. They save money on packaging. They save money on transportation costs. They save money on the materials that they need to label and package their products, such as the marks and labels and paperwork. Most of the new quantities don't even need hazardous shipping papers, so they didn't have to pay for that additional cost. So by teaching them to take advantage of that limited quantity relief that's already built into the regulations, we were able to help save them a lot of money. And you know what? I'm going to be honest with you. They were nervous about it at first. They said, we've always done this. We just do step 1, step 2, step 3. And that's great, except for they were missing a lot. Another one that a lot of our clients can ends up being able to take advantage of is combustible liquids. It's relief that's already built into the regulations, and just most people don't appreciate how valuable relief that can be. If you're shipping drums of something, for example, and you can convert it to a combustible liquid instead of a flammable liquid, now you don't have to ship it as hazardous at all. You could ship it as if it were a chair or some clothing, just like general freight. So some of these kinds of built-in relief are very valuable, but let's not overlook some of the less common ones. Becoming a party to a special permit, or perhaps even developing your own special permit. A special permit is a way that companies can take advantage of alternative ways to comply with the regulations that may not be in the regulations themselves. They just have to meet an equivalent level of safety. One of the common ones that a lot of our clients use is for poison packs. If you've ever heard of this regulation, it allows you to ship smaller quantities of poisonous materials. Generally, PG3 is the one that's mostly used. And they can ship these in specialized packaging that's extra strong. So for example, normally you would have a bottle in a box, for example, if you're going to ship a combination package. In the case of a poison pack, it's going to have an intermediate packaging. So instead of the bottle directly in the box, now the bottle has to go in a paint can type of mechanism. The paint can gets sealed, and then the paint can goes in the box. So there's the bottle, the paint can, and the box, 3 layers to make it more safe. But by doing that, it allows you to take advantage of shipping on some of these parcel carriers like FedEx, UPS, that sort of thing, who wouldn't normally take that product. And they allow you to ship this without any of the required marks and labels. You can just use this specialized SP packaging is what they call it. So some of these opportunities to take advantage of some of these things can really be a lot of savings. So instead of having to pay a freight company to move these packages of poisons, now you can put those on FedEx or UPS, they are significantly cheaper. You pay a little bit more money for the box than you would for an alternative type of packaging, but it gives you a lot more flexibility in your shipping options, which come in handy both for speed, expediency, as well as flexibility. We got to educate them also on the stuff that will keep the product safe. So it's not just about the types of transportation that they can use or the rules that they can take advantage of, but something so simple like properly closing the package. I mentioned a client of mine who had some loose closures. In the case of that one, it was a rail car with flammable liquids in it. And this company continually had these loose closures. They kept sending these rail cars out. And the rail cars didn't have the liquid line, which is a valve on top of the rail car that helps load or unload the liquid product from the tank car. And they kept leaving the valves open. Well, we had to do a small investigation to figure out why that was happening. But the bottom line is they got threatened with the maximum penalty per day per violation, which at the time that this incident happened was $75,000 per day per violation. So if you think about that for a second, if you have 3 loose closures on a rail car and you send that out for 1 day, it's $225,000 for 1 day. If that rail car now happens to be in transit for 10 days, now you're talking $2.25 million for 1 rail car. Clearly, you can't stay profitable if that continues. Now, that's pretty serious. That doesn't happen all the time. But when you have something that's a repeated violation like that, the DOT will eventually lose their patience and say, okay, we've given you the $2,000 fine, we've given you the $5,000 fine, $10,000 fine, and you're not listening. So the next time we catch you, it's going to be the maximum penalty per day. And that does happen. It can happen. FAA is known for doing that, which is the Federal Aviation Administration. They're in charge of air transportation. So they enforce all of the air regulations. And they're known for pretty substantial violations. And they don't wait a long time to get to that point either. So about properly closing packages, it's not only about your bulk packages, like your rail cars or your trucks, but it's also about knowing which piece of equipment do I need to close the bung on the top of this drum. Oh, this drum is an open top drum, it doesn't have a bung? Okay, so what do I need now? If I've got a box, I need to know that I need specific tape, specific cushioning, specific absorbent. I need to put it in the bag, tie the bag with this piece of material provided, all of the things that you need to do. There's written instructions for how to use these packages. And if you don't follow those instructions, you can't be sure that the product is not going to leak. Those packages are tested and designed to be assembled in a certain way with certain materials. And the students need to understand that that's an important piece of transportation. And maintaining those records, those written instructions, is also part of their job as EHS providers. So we teach them the proper tools to use and also what not to use. So in the case of rail car, for example, some valves have to be closed with a pipe wrench. Some valves should be closed with a torque wrench, and some valves shouldn't be closed with a tool at all. You should use your hand only. They're hand-tight connections. And if you do put a tool on some of those hand-tight connections, you can cause leaks of the product or even infiltration. So, for example, there's a valve on top of a rail car that contains an antifreeze. And if you crank down on that with a wrench and you break that tube, the antifreeze will now get into your product and contaminate it, potentially ruining an entire rail car worth of product. And some rail cars can be $1 million or plus dollars per car. So by putting a tool on the connection that shouldn't have had a tool, we've now destroyed potentially $1 million plus worth of product. So it's not only what tools to use, but it's also what tools not to use. Anybody who's ever worked in a warehouse or any sort of large packaging, you've probably heard of something called a cheater bar. This is a very common use tool. Unfortunately, it's not authorized. And if you use a cheater bar, which is basically you add a lever to the end of a handle to get extra leverage to be able to open a step valve or a bung or something like that that is having a problem, you put too much torque on it, you can strip the inside of the valve, you can break off nuts and stuff that you can't see. So it's not only about, okay, this one needs a torque wrench, this one needs a pipe wrench. Oh, this one over here is a big pipe wrench. It's got to be 36 inches because it's the only one that'll fit properly. But it's also, don't put a tool on this. Don't use a cheater bar on this. Making sure, because these packages have to go out in a way that's going to keep material inside the package. And if you violate the security of those connections, you can't guarantee that that product is going to stay in there. And the consequences of that could be pretty serious. We had one gentleman mistreat a steam valve. A steam valve on a rail car, for example, is used to liquefy solid product. And he did something he wasn't supposed to, and he put a tool on a steam pipe he should never have touched. Unfortunately, it meant that he got so severely burned, he almost lost both of his legs. Luckily, that didn't happen. He was able to eventually go back to work, but he had to go to a desk job. He could no longer do the field work that he had done for 20 years of his career. But then there's also things about teaching them why they need to do things a certain way. So, a lot of people, like, I'm pretty stubborn. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty stubborn. And if I've got it set in my head that it's the right way to do something, I'm going to still continue to think that the way I'm doing it is the right way until someone explains to me why it's not. So, a company that I used to work for used to, as I mentioned in the beginning, used to basically just teach their people, do A, B, C, and D. Don't ask questions, don't think, just do. Unfortunately, that means if something goes wrong, they may not be trained to recognize that it's not right, which puts them and the company at risk, in my opinion. To teach them why they need to do things a certain way. If you want me to use this box and this bottle, tell me why. Let me understand it so I can make an informed decision and I can appreciate the necessity of me following those instructions. Palletizing is one great example. When you teach people in a warehouse how to palletize, it's not only important to teach them about balance and using the proper shrink wrap and making sure it's the right tightness so that it holds the packages without squashing them, but also teaching them something simple like making sure they turn the packages so the labels can be seen. There's nothing worse than breaking down a pallet and you think it's all one product and you get inside and find out that it's entirely something different or that there's other things hidden in there. So organizing the pallet in such a way that all the things that we need to see are visible, the different types of hazards that are in there that we could be exposed to, for example, and making sure something simple like the materials don't mix with other products they're not supposed to. You can't palletize, for example, an acid and a base on the same pallet. If they mix, you can have a catastrophic failure, a reaction. So teaching them to think about things like that, about what can be put together, how it can be put together safely, that if both things should leak, we're not going to have a catastrophic problem. And blocking and bracing is a highly underappreciated aspect of transportation. One of the worst examples I've seen of this is actually, believe it or not, in the pharmaceutical industry. There is a certain pharmaceutical provider that I worked with at one time that was losing millions of dollars a month in product because they weren't properly palletizing and blocking and bracing their materials inside the vehicle. So, the truck would be going down the road and the pallet would fall over and all the pills that they were manufacturing would be all over the back of the truck. And I don't know about you guys, but some of the prescriptions I take are pretty expensive. So you can imagine that could add up pretty quickly in terms of lost product. And it doesn't have to be just pharmaceuticals. It could be anything. It could be all sorts of different hazardous materials. If you're taking the time and the energy to manufacture something and sell something, your customer's expecting it at a certain day and time. And if now that pallet breaks or that blocking bracing fails and the stuff is spilled out all over the truck, not only do you have product loss, but you have an environmental exposure, potentially human exposures, and now you have an unhappy customer who's not going to get the product that they ordered in time. So there's a lot of things that go into this that people need to appreciate. And the most important one is teach your EHS students how to audit their own companies and their fellow employees. If they're going to put a new process into place, for example, or a new standard operating procedure, or they're just going to make sure that the ones that are existing are being followed, they have to have a process for evaluating that. One of the most underappreciated skills in EHS today, in my opinion, is auditing. People need to understand not only how to audit, but what to audit, and most importantly, how to report on it. And what I mean by that is, not only do you need to report your findings, but you also need to be able to report your recommendations and then prioritize them. So when I do an audit for a company, I spend a couple of days generally going through their whole operation, paperwork, observing the work, evaluating standard operating procedures, all of this stuff. And when I get done, I might have a 15-page report or a 20-page report. They're not going to implement everything I suggest, and that's okay. So I need to prioritize for them what things are most important based on, number one, safety. Anything that's a safety issue is automatically the highest priority. I'm sure that makes sense to everyone in this room. And then after that, it's a little bit subjective. Things that are going to cost them a lot of money or cause them a lot of risk and liability are definitely going to be higher priority than something that's just kind of a nice to have. But clearly outlining what those priorities are using any system that you want, whether it's a red for very high priority, green for very low, yellow for middle, or you use a scale of 1 to 5, or something that makes sense to everyone involved. The stakeholders can decide on that. But the most important thing is prioritizing. On occasion, when we do audits for companies, we have the opportunity and privilege to review the audits that have been done for their company previously by other providers. And there's sometimes I've been handed a 100-page report. I got to tell you, not a lot of people are going to thoroughly read a 100-page report. So, if that's what you end up with is some voluminous document, that prioritization becomes even more important. I'm kind of more of the KISS example. I like to keep it simple, stupid. I don't want to give you 50 pages of material when 10 will do. I want to give you photographs of what I'm trying to demonstrate, tell you what the rule is, tell you what the industry best practice is, and tell you what I recommend and why. And I try to do that in as short a time as possible to make sure that you understand it and can get that information quickly and make a decision. Auditing is a highly underappreciated skill that definitely should be part of transportation, of any EHS education. So as you've kind of gotten the feeling now, for anyone who's never actually worked in an EHS role, although many of you probably have in some form or fashion, an EHS job in the real world requires a bunch of different skills. I kind of think about them in sort of 4 bubbles. At the bottom here in my bluish green bubble, I have environmental. That's kind of all the things that come under EPA. That would be your hazardous waste, your community reporting, if you have any SARA responsibilities, all of these different alphabet soup responsibilities that you have, mostly for reporting, that you have to do to tell people what you have in your facility, what you're storing, especially when they come to certain types of chemicals that are on various lists. It's quite a bit. There's also air and water permitting in there, stormwater treatment a lot of times, hazardous waste, basically anything that the EPA has jurisdiction over. In this blue bubble over here, I have workplace safety. That includes all of your industrial hygiene, safe handling, first aid, often drug and alcohol testing, and especially if you have your own company drivers, this drug and alcohol testing becomes very important. But anyone in a safety sensitive role could be subject to drug and alcohol testing. So that all falls under the OSHA requirements. In the green bubble on the right, I have your county, city, and state ordinances. This will include things like your local fire codes, emergency response planning, storage plans, potentially spill response plans if that's necessary. And then at the top in yellow, obviously, is transportation. It's all the stuff that we've been talking about today. Regulations, vehicles, packages, mode requirements, operations, logistics, employee training, and relief and exceptions. And again, obviously, this is a very big 30,000 foot view here, right? I can't possibly cover everything that you need to know in the amount of time that you guys have granted me today, but just to give you an idea, there's a lot of skills that are required. And most of these are covered in the EHS career options for education that the universities have. I would say the ones that probably, besides transportation, the only other one I don't see a lot of education on is local fire codes. And the reason for that is pretty obvious because they're going to be very specific to the area. So the best thing we can do for that one is to teach something like the NFPA regulations. I'm sorry, I hit the mouse by mistake, my apologies. The local fire codes, the best thing we can do is to try to teach the NFPA requirements, which is what most counties and communities are based their fire codes on anyway. NFPA is the National Fire Protection Agency. And that is the basis for most fire requirements in terms of storage of hazardous materials on site, sprinklering, extinguishers, things like that. So if you understand the NFPA, you'll be pretty well set up to identify the local codes in your area and understand what it is that's required. I did a white paper a number of months ago, maybe almost a year ago now, specific to warehouses actually. I was trying to understand as we were getting more heavily involved in the warehouse industry from our perspective as consultants, I wanted to understand more about what they felt their issues were in the real world. So I used some of my contacts in the industry and I reached out to a bunch of chemical warehouses all over the United States and interviewed them with a series of questions and trying to identify basically what keeps them up at night. You know, what is the things that you're concerned about? What is the things that you feel like you don't have enough information about? And every single solitary warehouse that I spoke to had the same response. It was the local fire codes. And granted, these were third-party warehouses, but a lot of the chemical companies use third-party or public warehouses to store their products. So they're doing business with these types of companies. And a lot of them also were manufacturers that had their own warehouses as well. So that's something to think about too. So in terms of logistics skills, we talked about this one a little bit. This is something that we do see a little bit becoming more popular in the EHS field for education. When I was doing my research for this particular speech, I did notice a lot more logistics classes than I had been seeing when I was going through this program and evaluating colleges for my master's degree in environmental health and safety. When I was going through this was probably 7 or 8 years ago, and logistics really wasn't talked about all that often back then. But now when I did this research, I'm finding it is becoming a little bit more prevalent, but it's still in the one class range. There's usually one class on logistics in the whole program. But some of the things that become really important in the real world when you're doing this job is vetting and selecting your carriers. Now, for rail, you don't have a lot of options, but for vessel, air, and highway, there's a lot of different options out there that you can choose from. Especially when it comes to trucking, you have to be a little bit careful because basically anybody that shows up in a truck is assumed to be legitimate. So if somebody shows up in your facility in a FedEx truck, most companies don't bother to check ID. It's true. I was a little surprised about that as well, and as I'm sure many of you are, but they recognize the uniform or they recognize the truck. A lot of people don't bother to check identification. Well, there's been more than one case in this country where someone has stolen a truck and then used that equipment to steal the products. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, it happens more with armored vehicles and stuff like that than it does necessarily with hazmat, but it certainly can happen. You know, the Oklahoma City bombing was carried off with diesel fuel and ammonium nitrate fertilizer, so it's not like it would take chlorine necessarily or ammonia or something terribly dangerous. It could be everyday product that we would buy from our local Lowe's and Home Depot. So we need to make sure we're checking the identification and making sure that our trucking carriers are qualified to handle the materials that we're giving them and that they're properly training their employees. The other thing to think about with trucking carriers in particular is security plans. There's a lot more access to the general public to a truck than there would be for the general public to get access to a vessel, an airplane, or even a railroad locomotive. They just don't have the ready access. But trucks, they're at the same truck stops as the general public. They're at the same gas stations as the general public, the same eating establishments and hotels and all these other things. So making sure that the trucking company has security protocols in place that are commensurate with the amount of risk you're handing them in your products is extremely important. If you're going to be giving them poison inhalation hazards, you definitely want to make sure they have stricter protocols than if you're going to be giving them lithium batteries, for example. So not only should EHS students be taught about big trucks, big quantities, rail cars and tank truck quantities, bulk quantities, but also about how the small parcel service works. So there's, you know, the FedEx and the UPS are under one set of rules, the post office is under a different set of rules, and understanding the nuances of, you know, how many people know that when you send something out on FedEx, if you don't check the box the correct way, your shipment could end up on an airplane, even though it may not be packaged to go by air. So you have to make sure that you take precautions for things like that. So, you know, if there's a possibility that your shipment could end up on an airplane, you either need to make sure that that doesn't happen through various modes with the carrier, or making sure you're packaging so that it could go by air if necessary. You know, something like that most people don't even appreciate. How to use and select an appropriate rail car. We had a client recently order, and I said recently, we're going back probably 5 years now, order rail cars for, they wanted to ship crude oil in these rail cars, but they didn't understand the rules and they ordered the wrong rail cars. They ordered rail cars that were suitable for asphalt, that were not suitable for crude oil. And that accident nearly cost them $60 million. Luckily, I was able to get it fixed through some crazy deals that will never be able to happen again. But I did get it fixed, and they were able to use those rail cars for several years. Overseas brokers, understanding how the brokerage system works with vessel carriers, understanding how vessel carriers are chosen, how what documentation is required, especially to go through customs. So many hazmat shipments get stuck going through customs because something isn't right. The placards are wrong. We've had one client had placards coming in that were in another language. In the United States, they have to be in English. Something so simple. The word flammable, everybody in the US knows what that means. But in Europe, the French word is inflammable, or what looks like to us inflammable. And so to us, that might have the opposite meaning. It's not flammable. Whereas in French, it means it is flammable. Something that simple could really make a big difference. For example, they don't use the word poison internationally because the French word for poison is poisson, which is French for fish. So you don't want to accidentally call something fish when it's poison. So knowing that you have to have the placards in English when they come into the United States, and that they can't go out of the United States saying poison, things like that, those are all things that are going to be important for someone in EHS and logistics to understand. Security plans. In the United States, we have some pretty strict requirements on security plans. I think the only one that's really stricter when it comes to sort of emergency response and security is Canada. they have an ERAP program for emergency response in particular that is very, very strict and can be a little bit difficult to navigate. But security plans, ERAPs, things like that, depending on where you're doing business, those are important things to consider and understand that are going to be necessary. An ERAP, for example, can be very expensive to put together. So understanding that ahead of time and what that entails is important. Carrier must maintain a level of safety and security throughout the cycle of transport, which kind of ties all these things back in together, right? If you know who you're dealing with, if you're properly vetting your logistics, if you're properly training your EHS people to understand what is required, then they can make sure that the people that they're choosing as carriers can maintain that level of safety and security as they go throughout this transportation chain. So why do all this? What is the benefit to your students if you're the head of a department or a professor, or if you are a student? Why do you care so much about this transportation stuff, or why should you care? Well, if you're a student, it makes you more marketable to potential employers. If you think about it, well-employed students after graduation means more students for the school, more revenue for the school, but it also means the students can be more competitive compared to their less well-trained colleagues. So when we all graduate from school, obviously the most important thing that we want is a job, right? We didn't go through 4 years of school or more to be on the unemployment line. We went through that to be able to get a job that would meet our definition of success, whatever that might be. And the more competitive we can make ourselves, the more well-trained we can make ourselves, the more we can set ourselves apart from those other students, the more opportunities we'll have. We can better serve our employees the more real-life applicability skills that we have. If the students see the value in the education that we are providing them as educators, they might come back for more. If they go through our undergrad program and they were able to get a good job, they felt well prepared, they felt successful in their role, then maybe they'll come back to us for their master's degree or refer their colleagues to us. They will also be able to increase their employees' bottom line once they become employees. They can use and understand regulatory nuance more than their colleagues will be able to, and they'll be able to take advantage of just opportunities to select better transportation options, reduce risk, and manage crises better than their competitors, which sets them up for success. And successful students make successful educators. All right, so how as a school do we update our curriculum? Well, one of the ways I had mentioned, and I'm not here to sell a book, but this is a solution. This is why I wrote this book. So I want to introduce you to it so you're aware of it. I wrote this book specifically to help educators, my students in particular when I originally wrote it, understand transportation better. There's just no good resources out there other than the CFR, which is great reading if you have insomnia, by the way. But there's really no great resources out there for transportation education. So I wrote this for my students. And since then, I've also given it to many of my clients because I'm able to help them understand this in this very practical way. It is for sale right now, so if you want to check it out, I'm also happy to provide anyone in this meeting a free copy via ebook if you'd like to have one to check out. So just let me know. My contact information is on this presentation, and Brett has it as well, and I'm happy to provide a free copy. But some of the things that either my book or whatever way you refresh your curriculum could provide is things like regulatory structure, right? Training requirements, the details about how to classify a product. You'd be amazed at how few people actually know how to do that. And not everyone is going to need to do that, but because classification, the determining of what the hazards are and how we can transport it, that's the basis for everything else that we do in transportation. So you may not be doing that in your job. That might be left up to the people in the laboratory or R&D or whatever, but understanding how that works, why it works, and how it drives every single thing that we can do with that material later, that's really, really important, because what we call it today can change the whole way we deal with that product in our company for the future. And that includes things like choosing a proper shipping name, properly using the HazMat table, being able to understand how to find the relief and exceptions that might apply to our package, our material, or our mode of transport. Special permits, and obviously your HazCom, right? Your hazard communications, marketing, labeling, placarding. and shipping papers. Also, it'll cover safety data sheets, security plans, and I think the last 4 items in this right-hand column are the most important pieces here. Modal-specific things, operational considerations. And what I mean by operational considerations is working within the existing operation and the existing culture. So if I come in as a consultant and I try to completely upend their entire company and their culture and everything else, it's not going to work. It's not going to work long term. But being able to work within the existing framework that their company already has and say, okay, how do we tweak this to make this work for you better? Whether that's working within the culture, working within the operational realities, the existing limitations, making that as effective for them so that it can be long-term, successful for the long term. And incident investigation from the EHS perspective. Most of these schools do have an incident investigation type of scenario, but thinking about it from the EHS perspective is just a little bit different. And so, as a DOT inspector and somewhat as a consultant as well, I've investigated lots and lots of incidents to get at the root cause, and with the gear more towards understanding the root cause so we can prevent the recurrence. That's where we're going with that. And then last but not least, managing and benefiting from a DOT inspection. So everyone has to go through inspections, whether it's EPA, OSHA, DOT, whatever. But the key there is the benefiting from it part. How do I make this DOT inspection work to my advantage? What can I do? What can I learn from it? What can I take away from it to be even more successful tomorrow than I am today? And using and working and developing that very positive working relationship with your inspector, but also understanding they're human too, and knowing when it's okay to speak up and question things, when it's okay to ask for the evidentiary proof of what they're telling you. Just kind of managing that relationship is what that last chapter is about. Okay, so I want to thank everyone for their time and attention. Brett, I believe that after we're done here, we're going into a breakout session where I'm happy to answer anyone's questions. Is that how it's going to work?
Yeah, I was going to suggest if we just want to go ahead right into the questions in the Zoom room right here, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
Great. Everybody, if you've got any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or just hop on here. I don't believe that you're automatically muted, so.
Please take down my contact information. I'm all over LinkedIn and of course our website. So if you guys have any questions, we actually have a chat on our website as well. If you think it's something in a week from now or a month from now, please feel free to reach out.
Let's see, any questions, anybody? Wendy, where did you start did you start as an EHS student yourself?
No, actually I didn't. Believe it or not, I was actually going to join the Marine Corps, and I wanted to be a pilot. And just before I was leaving for officer candidate school, I sat down with my Vietnam vet dad, and after a very lengthy and very detailed conversation, it occurred to me that that was not the life for me. So much respect for anybody in the military, I realized I could not do it. So I joined the fire department instead. So instead of having to be in those situations, I decided to be in a situation where I could save lives. Not that the military doesn't sometimes do that, but and so I became a firefighter, and I got on the HazMat response team, and that was really what started my love with HazMat. And then I had the opportunity from the firefighting job to go be a federal regulator and do HazMat inspections for the federal government of shippers that were shipping by rail in my case. So I've never looked back. I mean, it's honestly the best job I've ever had, and I love what I do. Very passionate about it, as you probably could tell.
Great. All right, well, if nobody has any further questions, take down Wendy's info, send her a connect on Socio, whatever way you guys would like to get in touch with her. But that's it. Thank you so much, Wendy, for your time and your flexibility with our platform.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about the technical.
Oh.
Glad we were able to reschedule, though.
No, not your fault at all. That's the world we're living in. So, all right. Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks, Wendy. And I will see you all at the rest of the conference.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.